This is an SM Media production.
Hi, folks, and welcome to the latest episode of Chronicle, the Rangers journey, right here on SM Media. I'm Scott Pike. It's an absolute pleasure to be your host, as always. We are now at the penultimate episode, the episode we've been trying to do for weeks, and we've finally got there. We do have, obviously, this is going to be a recap. This is going to be a recap where we look back at the past 18 episodes. We talk about the big kind of takeaways we've had from the whole journey and how the future can be different, how we can look towards a brighter and prosperous dawn at the end of what was a pretty weird kind of roller coaster kind of thing as well. And to join me in this part of the journey, it is a pleasure to welcome Craig Rae. Craig, welcome to the show. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on.
Aye, mate, it's an absolute pleasure myself. As I say, good to be on finally. So I'm looking forward to it.
This is a weird one because we kind of don't really know how this is going to turn out. We've thought about like how do we wrap a series like this up when you went through so many different eras of the club. We went from winning nothing to being dominating in the 80s and 90s to then a bit of turmoil towards the kind of the 21st century and then getting the slower recovery back to winning titles. It's exactly that. It's a roller coaster, Craig. It's so much. I mean, going through it for 18 episodes, every big deal, every big moment in the club's history on and off the park in those kind of 23 years, there is a lot to unpack.
There absolutely is. I mean, it's definitely Hollywood blockbuster style types following Rangers into it. I mean, you wouldn't change it. You definitely wouldn't change it. But no, I'm delighted to be here and looking forward to getting stuck in. It'll certainly be a good one, mate.
You said it there about obviously being a Hollywood blockbuster. You could probably, Steven Spielberg would probably look at that script and think that can't have happened in real life, but it has, and it is. It's just there's so much to unpack. I mean, when we kind of started, we obviously done the first two episodes talking about the kind of need for a revolution, the need for a new guy to come in and really kind of take the club forward. And then as soon as had obviously come in '86, and there was that complete shift in terms of obviously Souness was a big character and the big signings that came in. It just all seemed to fit perfectly, and the foundations were laid for Murray's arrival in '88, and Souness was a big player in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you look at Souness and Murray sort of side by side, I think they're very similar characters, and I think characters as opposed to persons maybe the right word to use
Yeah.
because I think I'm not trying to dehumanize him in any way at all, but I mean you look at the stature of someone like Souness and the stature of someone like David Murray, who at the time was but he was certainly on the verge of a knighthood, if not already been made a knight. I think there were stories of him. He had the confidence he would go up to Joanna Lumley at
Mm-hmm.
gala balls and stuff like that and ask her out. So I mean, the guy had a gallousness about him, and I think it's quite clear that Graham Souness had that gallousness as well. And I think if when you look at Souness, not just on the pitch what he done with Rangers, but off it as well, with obviously the signing a Mo Johnson, and I think probably changing it changed the landscape of Scottish football. His arrival and then the subsequent Walter Smith era, which obviously Graham Souness had a massive impact on bringing Walter to the club. So I think if you look at them side by side, they're very similar characters.
The thing with Murray is obviously, and when we go into Murray and as a whole, when we've done it so many times, is there is a difference between 1988 David Murray and 2008 David Murray. They're two completely different people. And it does come in. It doesn't come in and think this is it doesn't come into Rangers to make a fortune. There's a lot of business owners go into a place. They go in usually to make money, and a lot of the people after David Murray at Rangers, their whole objective was to leave with quite a tidy profit, and I'm sure a lot of them did. And I don't think Murray ever. Well, we can know now. David Murray never. He didn't put his own money in, but he didn't take his own money. He didn't take any money out. He certainly had his fun in the first era as well. But I find it very interesting that he comes in. He comes in because he wants to be a big player in Scottish society. He could make the biggest metals deal in the world. It's not going to get you in the front page of the Daily Record or the Sun. The taking over Rangers is going to do that, and that's the whole Murray MO for when he takes over. He comes in 1988 because he wants to be a player on the Scottish stage, and at the time, there's no better place to do that than Ibrox. Things are going well. As the Soonest revolution's in full effect, the club are getting their finger out. It all kind of see it as a perfect storm. Everybody involved is happy at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and as a football fan yourself, you know, people of that era would look back at that time and think, wow, things are great. We're obviously winning leagues. We've got Soonest here. We're signing, you know, obviously after what happened with Hillsborough, Chris Woods, Terry Butchers and whatnot, because English clubs couldn't play in Europe. And I kind of wonder maybe sometimes if, you know, obviously with the knowledge that English clubs were going to get banned from Europe and stuff like that, if maybe David Murray would have been looking to go down south at some point, because I think there might have been, I don't know if there was talk about him going to United, or he certainly might have been an United fan.
He was definitely looking to move into United, and I think it was Soonest that said, "Listen, that you can go to Ibrox. The opportunities there." The Lawrence Marlborough team, they were more. I think people viewed them as custodians. I don't think they were ever wanting to make it a long-term thing at the club. Obviously, they've been there since the 70s, but I think they were looking to go abroad. And as I say, Murray is, and the thing, the kind of conclusion of the overall thing is that Murray wasn't a fan of Rangers, and that is a play in his decisions a lot later on. But it all fits. He's wanting to become a bigger player. He's got the guy alongside him. He's friendly with Soonest. Soonest kind of introduces him. It's all done relatively quick. Actually, he does it pretty quick, and he's at the helm. And not even 2 years after he's in, he's completely changed the culture. He's brought the Johnson signing that we touched on. That completely transforms the culture in Scottish football, because that Murray and Souness, both of them, they had to do that, and they absolutely had to change the culture. That they were the two guys that did that.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think, forgetting the sort of maybe culture within Rangers fans and whatnot, I think it maybe changed the culture and what wider Scottish society sort of viewed Rangers, because if you look at the sort of next 9-10 years, you know, Murray and the media, you know, were hand in hand. I mean, do you know what I mean? It's like anything he said, it would be gospel to the media. They would love it. They would, you know, the succulent lamb culture, I believe they might have called it back in the day. But like, it was, and as I say, it's like Murray as well. When you think about it, he was probably one of the first, if not the first, of, in Britain anyway, your sort of modern football owners, where you don't really think of the club, but you think of the owner. You look at Abramovich at Chelsea, Daniel Levy at Spurs, the Glazers at Man United and stuff like that. Like, these people want to be seen as the club itself. And ironically enough, all these people never actually seem to be fans of the club when coming in. They just see like a big sort of vanity project. And I think at the end of the day, unfortunately for Rangers down the line, that's what it was for David Murray. I mean, for all the success that you can have with something like David Murray, I think the fact that he didn't support the club growing up, I think, as you touched on earlier, Scott, that had an impact on his decision making in the future. And it's kind of like, you can, when you're not emotionally invested, as opposed to, well, he wasn't even financially invested, was he? Not properly, but when you don't have that emotional investment into something, it can work well for a while, and maybe you can have the greatest and the highest of highs, but eventually you're going to have the lowest of the lows, which is exactly what happened.
Yeah, I think as well, like when he comes in, he's maybe not a fan. He's maybe not somebody. I don't imagine David Murray going to been sitting in the Loudon Tavern like before a game, before he took over like that. I can imagine him when he got there, like everything becoming a fan, because on-field success meant he was successful. But it's when that begins to change, when he obviously has the ambition for Europe, and I think Europe's a big part of his overall thing, what he wants to do. He wants to be synonymous with the club. I find it very similar to Jack Walker at Blackburn. Jack Walker later on, obviously a local man, a local businessman made good. Like, he goes into Blackburn, he puts a lot of his own money in, he completely transforms the club's fortune, wins a title. You know what I mean? Obviously passes away, and there's a street named after him at Ewood Park. I think Murray wanted that. I think Murray wanted the thing similar to a Jack Walker, similar to maybe a Berlusconi's a bad example, but I think there was that thing of he wanted to go further in the world. He wanted the Rangers to be a transfer, maybe into politics. I don't know. Probably David Murray, I would imagine, would be the only person that would know that. But that kind of idea that this Rangers project would transform him into top of Scottish culture, the front page of the papers, eventually a knighthood, which he would go on to get, and things like that. It was ideal for him. It's when that begins to change, when it stops, when the fun runs out, and we speak about that so often, when it became less about a leisure pursuit and more about trying to just get through every week. And that was the big thing with Murray. You could see that change in him. You could see the guy who would be he would be on the season review DVDs. He would be answering Q&As in the Rangers news. He would be doing everything. He was a PR guy for the club, and that's something I've got now. Like, with the club, they don't have a good PR system. David Murray was the Rangers PR for years. He had his journalists. But I think we need to touch on that as well. He certainly gave sweeties to a lot of those guys in the papers who would write good things about him, and that it did work. And we went through that as well with a great episode with Ian King who used to write for Sunday Mail, who would tell us about what you would get offered and things like that. You would get. I mean, you know what I mean? If you're sitting working at a newspaper and the owner of Rangers is telling you, like, come to my vineyard in France, and I'll give you all these exclusives, you're not turning it down. You'd be crazy. You know what I mean? And when the club are so successful, and they do sell papers back then, papers did sell, and a 6-page interview with David Murray, that was selling you a week's worth of papers.
No, exactly. I think it's interesting as well. You touched on the sort of being the PR of Rangers and the face of Rangers. I find it interesting that it always seemed to be kind of, as soon as those bad times hit, he was nowhere to be seen, really. Do you know what I mean? He sort of gave up. I know, obviously, new chairman and whatnot were installed sort of the early sort of 2000s. That's when, you know, a lot of stuff was transpiring. A lot of the cost-cutting measures under Alec McLeish was happening. And it's like, it's almost as if Murray only wanted to be attached to the good stuff that was happening with Rangers. You know, 9 in a row,
I think that's totally
advocate.
Right.
But then as soon as, you know, you're losing Barry Ferguson, the bank's coming in and taking control of the club, I don't want to be part of that. I'll let somebody else deal with that. But the thing with David Murray is such an interesting character, because as you again touched on there, Scott, like, when it wasn't, you know, about him sort of even within Scottish society, it was him within a sort of wider European and even world. I would go as far as worldwide, because, you know, if you think about it, in a sense, David Murray was kind of a visionary, but he never actually acted out, if that kind of makes sense, because he was the one that was talking about, oh, there's going to be a European Super League, you know, the stuff that everyone was protesting about a couple of years ago. And let's face it, something to that effect probably will end up happening. David Murray was talking about this 30 odd years ago. You know, even stuff like expanding Ibrox and stuff like that. Murray Park at the time, state-of-the-art training facility, the best in Scotland, possibly the best in Britain, when it was built at the time. And, you know, that European sort of craving, that European success, and obviously it nearly happened in the early 90s, but I think, you know, the later failures of that team in Europe, I think maybe caused Murray to panic a wee bit, as if, you know, he kind of knows that he's sort of losing what he once had, and then it just goes into crazy stuff under Advocat. And I'm not even talking about the players that weren't brought in. I'm talking about the facts that the likes of Ronaldo is offered basically come up and play on a Tuesday night and govern. Like that's something you wouldn't even see now in football. Do you know what I mean? Like, can you imagine going to, I don't know, Mo Salah or somebody like that saying, you can just play the Champions League games at Ibrox? Like, it just wouldn't happen nowadays. But
No.
that's kind of what David Murray, but he obviously had that, helped with the formation of the Champions League. Rangers, one of the sort of the starting clubs in it. He felt that he was in that sort of European elite with the likes of Bernard Tapie and whatnot. He thought, and like even when Rangers were playing Marseille, you kind of see like the pictures and stuff like that of Murray and Tapie together, as if Murray's kind of saying, I've made it here.
And it's that thing as well of just wanting to be a visionary, and he did. 9 in a row. When you look at 9 in a row, it's domestic success, and it is. It's, I mean, David Murray. I've never spoke to David Murray. I've never met David Murray, but I can imagine if you'd asked David Murray about his time at Rangers, he would talk about 9 in a row. He would be, 9 in a row was all me. Gaza and Laudrup was all me. And yeah, you can say like Rangers were fine in that period. He was. I mean, obviously there wasn't as much of the borrowing going on as we would see later on. But do you know what I mean? He's bringing the players in. The club are doing the 92-93. I think is just a starter for the European ambition the club have. That's an early taster, and then obviously from then on in, it's Rangers want to win the European Cup. And was that realistic? I think 1992-93 is their best chance, because the Champions League that season, it's the first year of the Champions League. It does expand from there, and it becomes even harder for a team like Rangers. 1992-1993 is the best chance for that team to win. And I think Walter obviously pays the price later on in his first spell with the European results, but that's a massive, massive season for the club. Domestic treble, that amazing European run. Rangers don't lose a game in that European competition and don't make the final when we know obviously now it's down to some shenanigans, shall we say, but that does excited the supporters. The supporters wanted more. I can only imagine what David Murray wanted out of that.
No, exactly. And that, touched on there the sort of Marseille game, kind of in cahoots, so to speak, with Bernard Tapie. And it's just, as you say, it kind of did seem like at the time a starter, and especially with Murray only being in the job for a few years, you'd obviously had these domestic success, everything was going well, and then it just, he's thinking, I've helped with the formation of the Champions League, and in this first season, my club has came, within an inch of the final, and let's face it, should have at least got the chance to play that final. Obviously, you're coming up against incredible AC Milan side in the final, but I think that happened. Rangers should have at least got to that final. But he's obviously thinking at the time, I mean, it can only get better in terms of sort of global and European stature. But as you say, that was sort of that, and the Premier League had only started a couple of years earlier. That was the sort of planting the seeds for what is football now, modern football, in terms of the TV money, sponsorships, player wages and stuff like that. And over the next few years, it just completely, the money in football just blows out of proportion to a point where David Murray becomes, just irrelevant compared to these other owners in football. And I think that's something that he probably couldn't take.
It couldn't, you can't handle, and I think this is it, you can't handle when the world's going too fast for you and things like, I mean, when David Murray comes in, Rangers are matching Rangers could probably go to PSG and Bayern Munich and probably get their best player. They probably could. They could go and probably nick the manager if they really wanted to. By that period, like the Butchers and the Woods and that kind of player is over. It is over. And Gaza and Laudrup are the two. That's why we think about them so highly. It's because they're the two gems in that. A lot of Rangers signings at that point are second rate, and it's not nice to say that. There's a few big players in there that come through, but you look at the overall players Rangers bring in, even under Advocat, they're not going to get you to that next European level. Tactically, I don't think. I think Walter obviously learns later on in his second spell, which we'll talk about. At that point, Rangers are not tactically aware to be a big force in Europe. I don't think the three foreigners rule helps as well, but it all seems to. But I think Murray, at that point, he was obviously looking towards Europe. Now, with David Murray, he would look back as the domestic success as being the ultimate success of his tenure. And that's the difference.
Yeah, I think his legacy is different from what he would have envisaged it being at the start.
Yeah.
Still, in terms of on the pitch, I mean, it's not the worst legacy to leave behind on the pitch. You know, that's the best Rangers team of all time, and I would argue the best team that Scottish football's ever seen. I mean, obviously we know that Celtic did win the European Cup, but I think that Rangers 11 is better than that Celtic 11. That's just my opinion. I think, you know, maybe if Rangers only had to play about 4 games in 1967, I think that team would have probably won the European Cup. But you know, it's it is, and you know, you made the point there. I think it was a great point that I was actually thinking of. The players that we brought in under Advocat, great players. You know, you have the Boers and Newmans and Amorous and blah 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 blah. Great players for Rangers, amazing. But you know, in European football as a whole, still a good level. You know, but not the level that's going to win you the Champions League. Not going to get you into the quarters, the semis, the finals.
A big thing I wanted to kind of touch on, and this was something I thought about for a while. You look at 1998-99, and that's the first summer under Advocat. Probably, I spoke to a lot of people, it's probably the most exciting time to be a Rangers fan ever because there was new players coming in every day. But Newman and Van Bronckhorst are the kind of two big buys in that, probably about 5 million each. They're about 40 and 45th out of the kind of transfers that summer in terms of like European football. And those are massive signings. You think of that, 5.5 million in 1998 is a lot of money. That's, I mean,
yeah. I think it was the world record about 15 million at the time, something like that. So that's like a third of the world record.
But it's still not enough. And I think I kind of want to touch on all these managers at the end because I think there's a theme with the managers, but 9 in a row, obviously 10 in a row doesn't happen. Advocat's his project. Advocat is what he's been wanting to do. The domestic, that 9 in a row had just taken over everything, and then when that had finished, when that whole era had finished, Murray had the opportunity then to bring it to do the European thing and make the club bigger in Europe. Do you know what I mean? Play in that big stage. In the pursuit of Advocat. It's not really a pursuit because Advocat applies for the job, but David Murray loved that idea of bringing in a European manager. The big word was obviously discipline. That team by the Smith team by 98 were completely out of control. And I mean, Smith obviously learns from that later on. But Advocat was probably perfect for that time. And the first 2 seasons of that time are on the park. They're 5 trophies out of 6. The club are doing really well in Europe. It then starts this wee little change that we see in this overreaching that I think we see at this point.
Yeah, I agree. I think I maybe try and sum it up as maybe Murray's 3 rolls of the dice. It's like his first roll was when he came in, you know, then appointing Walter Smith 9 in a row, the European, sort of early European success. And then I think he kind of realises eventually after 93, maybe a few years after that it's not as, you know, easy as maybe he thought it was going to be. Then his second roll of the dice is Advocate, and this is when you start to see the debt and stuff like that just spiral out of control, and you know, he's just chasing something that's completely just not going to happen. And then I'm not going to say McLeish was his third roll of the dice because I think, as I say, he wasn't really.
I think Le Guin's his
third
roll of the dice.
I was going to say that because I think that summer, I know we'll touch on it a wee bit later on, there was a weird feeling about the club. There was a really exciting feeling about the club. I remember at the time, you know,
I think that's his last. Like I know, his last pursuit of perfection. I think is the word.
Yeah, because you know, Le Guin's came in, he's won X amount of league titles in a row at Lyon. He's built a great team there that were getting to quarter-final, semi-finals of the Champions League. Even off the park, I mean, certainly not, you know, in real terms, obviously, but visually, from a PR point of view, there was a big deal with JJB Sports. It was a big getting, lots of talk. If you remember as well, the stuff about the Las Vegas Sands, the redevelopment of
Oh, yeah.
Ibrox, and just completely, when you look back on it with hindsight, completely unrealistic expectations. But it's like you've got these these two events happening alongside Paul Le Guin coming in. So you're thinking there's a time. I remember, older people around me. I would only been about 9 or 10 at the time when Le Guin came in, but people are saying this is really, really exciting. Ibrox is going to get bigger. We're signing, one of the best, if not the best, hot property in European football at the time. An exciting new kit at the time, the biggest kit deal in Scottish football history, I think, or the biggest retail deal. And then you just realise eventually, probably after a couple of years, when it turns out that the bank's been controlling the club, basically, that it was all pretty much a smokescreen and that none of it was actually true.
Before, obviously, the kind of, I think Le Guin's a really interesting time in this whole journey, and it took an episode itself, that 6 months. There's just so much to get into, but by the millennium, there's a lot of change. Rangers are sitting with, do you know what I mean? Dominating Scottish football. I mean, that Orange Day, do you remember that? Like, you thought that would go on for forever. And the summer of 2000, I think, is the most pivotal time in the club, because he has obviously signed a bill for Advocat to bring in a lot of players. The team realised the wage bill is out of control, but there's a thing there that the team's in a really good place. Rangers are still in a decent place financially. There's a lot of borrowing going on, but the club aren't really. It's not like it's out of control. It's not like they're having to eventually kind of rip the squad up and things like that. But it's that complete, I think, two arrogant guys, to be honest, Murray and Advocat. The summer of 2000, the ridiculous spending on players that they didn't need. Do you know what I mean? There's a lot of players that come in, and obviously Celtic win the treble under O'Neill, and I think this reckoning just comes in that one season. The wage bill is out of control. There's players there that are like Marco Negri still in the wage bill. I think Rangers had just 35 players in that season. That is mental. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's in the era of big squads. That's still not acceptable. 35 players, and do you know what I mean? And that is the turning point, because then by that point, Murray has went from completely having control to being out of control, because him and Advocat at that point, they are just throwing anything at the wall. The spend is ridiculous. They're buying players. They buy Marcus Gale play him for 4 games and then sell him because they don't want him. It's just that level of recklessness at that point, and that is the big turning point, because by the summer of 2001, he has the chance. He could easily cut the cloth. He could easily. The fans wouldn't have probably accepted it at first, but eventually they would have went, right, we see what's going on. If Murray had just, and that's the thing, you said it earlier on, when things were good, you would hear David Murray all the time. When things weren't good, you wouldn't hear anything.
Exactly. I think certainly in that summer, it's a strange one, because as you said there, it seemed to just be players that you didn't need that were coming in, Obviously you had guys came in that would eventually do well for the club, your Rixons, Lovencrans, De Boer, Kenny Miller eventually would prove his worth about 7, well, no, more than 7, maybe 8 or 9 years down the line. But just that, I think that the right word was used there, just recklessness, and for that to happen, for this Rangers team,
£12 million striker just
for
because
this,
you can.
yeah, for this Rangers team to go from what they were, winning 5 trophies out of 6, doing pretty well in a tough Champions League, to then spending all that money in that summer and then losing a treble, not even managing to win a cup. I mean, it should, and again, it's not a bad Rangers team. It's not even bad players. It's good players that they've brought in, but it's just, I think maybe sometimes you can probably think you're a wee bit better than what you think you are, and I think arrogance is another word that you used earlier.
It's hubris. It's total hubris. It's just that's
absolutely. It's kind of like we've done this before. We can we can do it again. We can do it even more. But I think one thing as well that you need to remember is at that time you're dealing with a Celtic team who are now starting to get a grip, not
Yeah,
just as a team on the pitch, but as a club. Obviously they had Fergus McCann come in and sort of save them in the 90s, and it would have been round about this point, I believe, that Dermot Desmond when I
yeah,
came in, and he was obviously trying to put the club on a reasonable financial footing, and he supported Martin O'Neill when he came in. He gave him money to spend. Look, Rangers did spend money at the time. At the time, Celtic spent money as well. And I think certainly from a fan's perspective, when you look back on it, it was grown into you know, possibly a bit of a new golden era in Scottish football, because when you think about it, the next couple of years, Rangers, um, but as I say, we've done okay in the Champions League. Celtic get to the UEFA Cup final in Seville. You've got a point there where you've got two teams in Rangers and Celtic who are in the Champions League every year, pretty much.
hmm
Or if not, they're doing okay in the UEFA Cup, at least. Obviously, Rangers get to Manchester 5 years after that. So on the pitch, anyway, in terms of Scottish football, it's looking quite
yeah,
decent from a fan's point of view. But and again, this is, as you say, hubris, and that actually I think seeps into the rest of Scottish football, because you see at that time the likes of Dundee, Livingston just spend money that they couldn't keep up with, because they were trying to keep up with Rangers and Celtic, which is just completely unrealistic.
yeah. And then in 2001, I think Murray plants the grenade that will explode at a later date. The easy thing to do here would have been to cut cloth accordingly, put some of your own money in potentially to fix your situation. To when everything's got when you put too much of your capital on the line, and instead of that, he looks for a solution, and a guy comes to him with one called an employee benefit trust. Now, the myth that employee benefit trusts were illegal, they were not illegal when David Murray
Yeah.
signed to agree to use them in 2001. The way they were run, I don't know if that's maybe a can of worms that I think we don't open at this point, but they weren't run well. That's certainly well, I think we'll certainly both agree on that. They were not run well at all. But he plants a grenade, because tax law is the weirdest law in the world, because if they decide tomorrow that it's illegal, if the tax man decides tomorrow it's illegal to do podcasts, they could go back and fine us for every podcast we've done in the past.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way tax works. They go after you, no matter. They go after you. They backlog everything. David Murray, the smart businessman, had to know that. He had to know what I'm doing here could potentially explode down the line. Was it just a quick fix? Was it just hoping that this would all blow over by the time? Because I don't think at this point he's thinking, I'm going to set the club towards an iceberg. I think at this point he's just looking for something just to calm the storm.
Yeah, I think maybe desperation might be
Yes.
a sort of a better way to describe it, because as I mentioned earlier, this is basically the first time in his tenure that you've got, a good Celtic team there. Obviously, they'd stopped 10 in a row, but, that was kind of a one-hit wonder, that Celtic team. They came in, stopped 10 in a row, then Advocat came in, and things continued as they were during the 90s.
The famous thing about that is obviously the day after Wim Jansen wins the league, Fergus McCann says, I was going to sack him anyway.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? Like that, there's still this comedy side of Celtic at this point.
Yep.
Do you know what I
Yep.
mean? And that
Exactly, and it's just,
clear.
yeah, like as I say, this is the first time that there's, a proper, consistent challenge for Murray. And I think in terms of the European stuff now, I think we're getting to the point now in Europe where you're like, Rangers are not going to be anywhere near, the
Yeah.
the the pinnacles of what it was in 1993. We're now getting into the stage where it's, group stages trying to get into the last 16. I think back then it would have been a second group stage, but you know what I mean. Like try and get
Yeah.
into the latter stages, maybe get a good run in the UEFA Cup, which in fairness Rangers done okay in the UEFA Cup that year. But you know, as I say, just that desperation. And one thing, I don't think this ever crossed his mind because of the type of person that he is, but what even about just selling up? Because if you think about it from a Rangers fan's point of view, if David Murray decided to sell, even at that time, what would his legacy have been? It would
Oh,
have been 9 in a row, and that's it. Say,
we would probably have a David Murray way.
yeah, exactly. Even after obviously Celtic won a treble and stuff like that, kind of maybe just say, oh, do you know what? I've had my fun here. The game's up. I'll pass it on to someone, that can come in and do a decent job and, have the club in safe hands. But again, it's this ego that the guy's got that
Yeah,
he just wants more and he doesn't know when he's beaten, he doesn't know when to give up. And I mean, I'm not going to name specific people here, but I think if you look at certain people in history, they just don't know when to give up. And eventually when they do give up, it's too late. And that, as you mentioned, that grenade's already exploded.
I think he was a risk taker. I think he was
Yeah, absolutely.
someone who would. I think he always thought that something would come along, whether it was the proposed move to England or something like that. He would find a gem in the transfer market. He would find a bargain, and it would turn out to be a record transfer. I think he always thought some of the TV money, Rangers and Celtic would have their own TV deal and things like that. I think he always thought something would turn up and things would calm down. And
He just probably never envisaged how sort of tin pot the rest of Scottish football was when it comes to signing big TV deals.
Yeah, exactly. The world had changed round about him, and he couldn't get out of that. He couldn't get out of the bubble he was in. He thought he did. I think he thought that Rangers would just something would happen, something would change his fortune. But football changed so much, and the introduction of Sky and the English TV, the Bosman ruling as well, like things like that. The owner doesn't have the control of the players compared to what they did when even Murray came in. He couldn't play in that field anymore, and from 2001 onwards, he just becomes this. He's just looking for something to turn up for him. He's just looking for a quick fix. McLeish, what I think Alan McLeish is a really underrated Rangers manager, but there is no doubt in my mind that it's a step that he's a step down from Advocat, because it is downsizing. I remember at the time, I think it was Mark Dingwall that said this is downsizing. He was 100% right, because Advocat at the time was probably maybe a Ten Hag kind of level. Do you know what I mean? Like maybe that kind of. Do you know what I mean? That maybe level of manager that Rangers could go and get. But 2001, Rangers, they don't have the money to do that anymore. And McLeish, I think, gets an unfair rap in his time at Ibrox. I think he does really well with limited resources. He gets two teams sold out from under him. But it is a step down, and the club are just going in this downward trajectory to the point where in 2003, Murray has to cut costs. He can't bring himself to do it publicly. He can't bring himself to be the face of this complete transformation in the club, that they have to become a selling club. They have to change everything. He brings in John McClelland, who is a well-renowned cost cutter, and Murray can't bring himself to be the face of that bad period.
No, absolutely. And downsizing is absolutely the correct term. And obviously going into that Alec McLeish era, I mean, look, I love Alec McLeish. I think he's, as you say, a very, very underrated Rangers manager. Last Rangers manager to win a treble as well.
Yeah.
But it doesn't change the fact that, and I think there's a lot of similarities between the Alec McLeish era and the Walter Smith second reign, where it was cutting costs and stuff like that. And I think really that the reason that those teams done so well was largely because of the man that was in charge of that group of players.
Yeah.
I mean, Alec McLeish, for someone, I don't think Alec McLeish gets the respect that he deserves. Never mind, the trophies that he won at Ibrox. The fact that you look at Martin O'Neill's Celtic, and that is Celtic's second best team of all time that we're talking about here.
Absolutely.
And the period that Martin O'Neill was at Celtic and Alec McLeish was at Rangers, Alec McLeish won more trophies than Martin O'Neill. Alec McLeish had Martin O'Neill in his back pocket, basically, despite the fact that Rangers were cost cutting and Celtic were spending big money on good players. But even just the fact that Alec McLeish had the sort of tumultuation to go into a squad that had done what they'd done under Advocat, obviously hugely successful bar bar the one season, but that's a squad of Eagles, do you know what I mean? Like top earners, top players, guys like Ronald de Boer and stuff like that who have won European Cups, played for Holland. And the fact that Alec McLeish can, I don't want to go as far as saying he's a disciplinarian, because I don't think he kind of. I think a lot of those players maybe like the fact that he was just a fresh face. He came in, he maybe allowed guys like the ball to express themselves a wee
Yeah.
bit more that they maybe couldn't do under Advocat towards the end. And I think that was it, just a fresh face, someone that, because let's face it again, Advocat does have an ego.
Oh yeah.
And I don't think McLeish has got that ego about him. He's got an aura, but he doesn't have an ego, in my opinion. And I think just maybe letting those players just sort of free to do what they do, probably not putting them under any tremendous pressure, because they were already under pressure, and just letting them go and play their football. Kind of maybe a wee bit similar to what we're seeing just now at Rangers, possibly. But yeah, I think, as you say, very, very underrated manager.
And it's round about this time, obviously, that Murray comes back in. He's told by the bank that he has to go in and do the big share issue where he tries to raise 50 million. It doesn't rate. I think it raises a 50th of that, and he has to change the debt himself. He has to basically write off the debt from one company to sort out Rangers, and that was this thing. He could never bring himself to just sort his own problems out. He had to go to his friends at the Bank of Scotland, and he always seemed to have a way out in the bank. I think the bank situation at this point is out of control, and it is across the world. The world is just people are getting loans because they would see the bankers and the bankers with the same school as their children. Do you know what I mean? Like it was the banker's son went to the same school as their son. It was just, there was a lot going on at that point. It was just a crazy time in the world. But I think Le Guin is a very interesting time in the club because he does have to pursue Le Guin. Le Guin is not this. Advocat, I think, was different because Advocat wanted the job. Le Guin wasn't. Le Guin had to be persuaded to take the Rangers job, and Murray, he loved his negotiations. He loved to do his deals, and at that point, Murray wanted to. I think he wanted one last roll of the dice to see if he could compete at that European level. And fair play to him, he goes out and attracts a manager like Paul Le Guin, and Le Guin's a big name at this point, so he definitely does a lot of groundwork to get that guy in.
No, he does, and I remember at the time, as I mentioned earlier, just the excitement around the guy's appointment, and why wouldn't you be? I mean, the guy won, as I say, maybe three French leagues on the bounce for Lyon. That Lyon team were brilliant, coming through, guys like Gervinho and stuff like that. And it was a time where you could kind of tell that, French football, they'd had their wee sort of their period winning the World Cup and the Euros, and maybe fell off a wee bit, but you felt that they were maybe coming back with this just new team in Lyon who, they weren't a Marseille. I know PSG were never really a massive club, but they are based in Paris, obviously, so there is that element. But a team that, for round about like the Swiss and French Alps, basically, it's like it's not an easy place to get to. And he's came in, Le Guin. I think he came in. Did he not come in late because he was running the Sahara Desert?
Yeah.
Aye, I mean maybe he ran all the way down to South Africa, and that's where he found Dean Furman. I don't know.
The new Frank Lampard.
Aye, if only. But that it was an exciting time. As I say, there was things around the club at the time. JJB, as I say, that redevelopment at Ibrox that everyone was. But yeah, exactly. And funnily enough, it seemed to be at this point my money was kind of like, oh, should I maybe come back a wee bit? Yeah, it's like
you certainly saw a lot more of it in the public domain, and I think that's no coincidence because I think he felt like the cat had got the cream. He'd lured this top class manager into Rangers, and it was all him. And to be fair to him, he was. And I think there was a personal thing as well. Obviously, Murray was I think he's got a holiday home in front. He's got a vineyard, obviously.
He can speak French as well.
I think he's fluent in French.
French, yeah.
And I think there was a personal thing of that as well, that he'd lured out a man he knew. I think he'd managed to. I think he was friendly with Le Guin or whatever it was, but. Very quickly, though, I think it's safe to say Paul Le Guin does not. Maybe like a lot of foreign. I think we're maybe seeing it now with the Celtic manager. A lot of foreigners can come into Scottish football, and particularly with the two Old Firm clubs, and get instantly caught up in it in a good way. They can instantly take to it. Le Guin certainly didn't.
No, he didn't, and I'm wondering what David Murray must have promised Paul Le Guin.
It must have sold him a tremendous bill of goods.
Because I think that summer you're talking about what, maybe 3 million or something like that.
Yeah,
something like that we spent. I think CHRONICLE probably was the biggest outlay, and
probably Zebo.
We'll see, but that's right. Actually,
I don't think Paul Le Guin goes into that summer. I don't think Paul Le Guin takes that job if he's getting told you're signing 3 players from Austria, Vienna, and a 35-year-old goalkeeper. I sincerely doubt that.
No, exactly. I think that, the best thing that came out of that transfer window was obviously Sasa Papac. But just it kind of was like straight away. I remember the start to the season. I remember that game at Fir Park, and I remember watching it, and I thought we played brilliantly that day. Sionko scored pretty nonchalant goal, and you're thinking, okay, we conceded a goal and stuff, we had to come back to win the game. But there was signs that there was a good team there. Then I think the next game you're at home to, I think it was Dundee United. The fans made like a French flag display, and then like after 60 minutes or something like that, you're 2-0 down against Dundee United, who weren't very good that season. I think they ended up I think they brought in Craig Rae that season after sacking the manager. So we come back from that one 2 each. There's a couple of games after that, I think, where it's like draws, a couple of wins, and then it's not until I think it's always the same, isn't it? With a lot of managers that come in, you don't know how good or bad they are until they play Celtic. I think we'd lost at Hibs the week before, but these things happen. But I think that Celtic game where, ironically, Kenny Miller scores in it. I think that's when people sort of start to say, because Rangers never showed up that day. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was a complete whitewash by Celtic, and not a great Celtic team either, by the way. But I think you're finding at that time there's issues here, and then the next game's the one where Sebo scores the last minute winning against Aberdeen, and I think it is around this time where Le Guin actually goes to David Murray and says, absolutely, I want out, I don't want to be here anymore. And he actually says, in fairness to him, I believe, I don't want a pay packet or anything like that. I just want to go. But for whatever reason, David Murray somehow convinces a guy to stay.
And that's why I wanted to bring up managers and a winner, because I think the dynamic David Murray you only see with Graham Souness, who he doesn't bring in. He's quick. He tells Souness, you have to go. Your time is up. You have to go to Liverpool. You have to get out of here. The managers he appoints, it's Walter's going at the end of the season. Dick's moving upstairs. Alex has got 5 games to save his job. Doesn't win any of the 5 games, and he's staying. Le Guin, he has to persuade him to stay in the September. He only lets him go because he knows he can get Walter back in. It's not about what's best for the club. It's trying to save face for himself, because he doesn't want to be seen as getting an appointment wrong. Do you know what I mean? That is what Murray does, and he has to eventually just say to Le Guin, the Le Guin and Ferguson thing. I think there's probably a book could be written about that whole thing, because there's a lot of Ferguson doesn't cover himself in glory. But Le Guin, when you're in a job and you very early on you it's not for you, it's not what you thought it would be. You've been sold a pack of lies, which he was. He was sold a complete load of nonsense that you can't persuade that person to stay because they are not invested. Paul Le Guin was not happy in Scotland. He did not like the way the demands of Scottish football. You have to go to Inverness and win. You can't go there and draw and then tell everybody in the dressing room that we must stick together, we must move on. Do you know what I mean? That it's acceptable. It's not. It's such a weird wee country we live in, and especially in the football sense, and you can't do that. And Murray should have acted in the best interest of Le Guin more than anything. He should have acted sooner, and again, he just doesn't. He tries to save face for himself. It's not until he has to basically get the situation sorted when it's become out of control. And thankfully, I think Walter Smith comes in. Walter's able to completely steady the ship, and I think that's the last time that Murray has the thought in his head of this is what I want. I think by this point he's just like this. I'm done with this. I can't do what I used to do. I can't be the guy. I think a big thing as well is the media changed towards him. He did not have the control of the media. Celtic, in fairness to them, they'd completely smartened up. They'd brought in John Reid, who completely transformed the way. Lawwell's obviously there as well. Murray was warned. I've been told this recently. Murray was warned about what Peter Lawwell, the impact he can have, shall we say, and he completely ignored it. And that by that point, his world has completely changed to the point where he's just scunnered and he just wants out. And that's the first time you hear of him wanting to sell up, because at that point he's bored.
Yeah, and also as well, I don't think it's a coincidence that about a year or so later, obviously the global financial crash happens as well. I think there's an inevitability about what, frivolous spending is going to end up doing to the biggest organisations. Because if you look back at that time, some of the organisations that went under, Northern Rock, even Woolworths. I mean, we all miss going to the pick and mix at Woolies when we were Waynes, but I mean, it's like shops and stuff like that you never thought would go under. You thought these places would be here forever.
He's
and it was kind of, just, there was an inevitability about it if you had your head switched on. I think the problem with a lot of fans is, maybe not a problem's probably the wrong word. I just think that football fans mostly look at things on the pitch.
Yeah.
Certainly they did back then. That is still mostly the case now. But I think nowadays, because of, the internet and stuff like that, information is easily accessible about who's coming into your club, about what directors do, about their tax position, this, that, and the next thing. You know about people before they come in. And I think fans now have a more vested interest into how their club is run as opposed to how it goes on the pitch. But I did actually like your point there, which I never thought of until you made, Scott, about the whole sort of saving face for the managers and that theme. Because if you think about it, if you're David Murray, you're turning around and saying, well, every time I had a bad patch, look at how we recovered. Advocat ended, Walter ended poorly. Bring in Advocat, we recovered. Advocat ends badly. Bring in McLeish, we recovered. McLeish and Le Guin ends badly. Walter comes back, we recovered. So that is something that he would probably use as well and try and say, well, these appointments might have been failures, but look at how I recovered and turned that around. And maybe you're right. Maybe the likes of, he probably didn't get Le Guin in until Le Guin out until he realised that Walter would have came back. Obviously doing a great job for Scotland at the time.
Walter completely transformed as a manager, and he has that's why we think of Walter Smith the way we do, and that's why we remember him so fondly, because he came in at the worst time. He came in when the club had to. I mean, Murray does back him the first 18 months. He buys a lot of good players. He buys the squad that would go on and win the kind of 3 titles in a row and get to a cup final. He does get back. He finds the money to back him somehow. But Walter, after that, he doesn't have a big budget. He has to. It's shoestring. It really is, and he does a marvelous job in those seasons.
Oh yeah, I mean, incredible. Even the season that he comes back, that sort of second half of this season, he gets the credibility of the club back. You beat Celtic twice, and you start to build a defensive solidity that we would see throughout the next sort of 3.5 years, going into 07-08. The craziest season ever, really, in terms of everything that went on. And as you say, he was kind of back, I suppose, in the summer with the signings. I would say we never let anyone go, but I suppose at that time with that squad, I mean, who would you have sold for big money? And it's like, is anyone really going to be a loss? But he did build the foundations for that that 3-in-a-row team and that team that ended up getting to Manchester, and that's something that I think is really important, because we look at moments in Rangers history, and you know, the tifo that was there for the 150th game against Aberdeen, the third last one, I think, was that picture on Action Oval going up to the fans and celebrating in Florence, which is, you know, etched in every Rangers fan's memory, and it will be forever. And it's mad that, you know, people maybe thinking about something that only happened about 9 months ago, possibly even eclipsing that. But
Yeah,
that was an incredible season. And again, you know, for me, the only reason that Rangers get to Manchester is because of Walter Smith. The only
yeah,
reason that Rangers get 3-in-a-row is because of Walter Smith. And one thing that I think is really special about Walter Smith is, you know, I'll use me and my dad as an example. My dad would have been in his 20s in the 90s. You know, can imagine how that must have been, you know, watching Rangers, the best Rangers team ever in your 20s in the 90s. You know, so obviously the impact that Walter Smith would have had on him, it's not often that the same person, maybe 20 years down the line,
yeah.
has the same impact on you.
I think you're spot
And
on.
like, and you know, because if you think about in football, you all hear like stories from your dad, your uncle, or whatever, right? You know, about, you know, this guy was a great manager, that guy was a great manager, but then you actually got to experience that as well. And I think that's, for me, that's the most special thing about Walter Smith, is how I think he completely encapsulates at least 2 generations of Rangers fans, which just makes him immortal.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've absolutely nailed it there. And you said about you and your dad. I think me and my dad have that exact same thoughts as well. But the point Walter leaves, Murray wants to sell up, and I think I've got a wee theory about this, and I've spoken about this in previous shows. If David Murray sells in 2007 when he first put the club up for sale, I think he comes back. I think he comes back when he knows the situation's out of control. I think he tries to ride to the rescue. But 2011, when he eventually sells up, he needs out. He's desperate to get out to preserve his business. And if David Murray if the Murray family, if Rangers was a Murray institution, like if the Murray family of generations past had passed it along to David Murray, I think he is a bit more cautious about it, because I think he would have thought the historical value and things like that. I think he was out of control, and I think by 2011 the banking world had completely got him by the short and curlies. He just needed to preserve his empire. The bank, he probably couldn't send out. Probably couldn't do the lottery without Donald Muir having an impact on him. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think there was that as well. But 2011 though, he's willing to sell to anybody, and to the complete destruction of Rangers he does, and he sells it to Craig White. And I think Craig White is an interesting thing, and probably the next episode we'll go into a bit more detail about Craig White, things like that. But the David Murray closure of this chapter for me, and I think we kind of wrap up at the David Murray side of it. This is why I can never forgive David Murray, because he always said when he was going to sell, he would sell to someone with the best interests of the club at heart. And to save face, he said he was duped. David Murray was not duped.
No, of course he wasn't. It's Sir David Murray you're talking about. The guy is a lot of things, but he's not an idiot.
No, he certainly isn't.
So I think to come out and say something like that, you know, to be honest, he's doing himself a disservice there. If he actually might have deluded himself into thinking that now, because I mentioned it earlier as well. The guy clearly just didn't know when the game was up. And you get, as I said, so many people in history, whether it's football, politics, whatever, that just don't know when their time's up, and eventually that stains their legacy. And I think David Murray is one of possibly the most interesting character in Rangers history, because he brings you the highest of highs, but he also takes you to the lowest of lows. And there's not many people in life, never mind just football, that do that to you. But no, you're absolutely right. He was not duped off Craig White. No chance.
And that's why I can't. The whole thing of, is David Murray to blame for the whole thing? Yes. because he starts to train towards its destination of ultimate destruction, and he sells the club to he sells the club to a guy like Craig White and opens the club up to complete charlatans. And that's the David Murray legacy for me. Yes, he was a big part of 9 in a row. Yes, he brought in Paul Gascoigne and Brian Laudrup. Yes, Ibrox is a lot further forward in terms of stadium safety and things like that. Ibrox is one of the biggest stadiums in the world at this point. But it doesn't, you can't, I mean, there's a lot of historical figures, there's a lot of public figures who want you to remember their high points, but they want you to forget their low points. I think it's the same here. David Murray would ask you to remember the good times, but you can't escape the destruction.
No, you can't. I mean, one thing that I find interesting about the whole, just going back on the duped comment, I mean, I think it was maybe October, November 2011 when the BBC done their documentary on Craig White, and I think that was the first time that the sort of public eye kind of went, oh, wait a minute, this guy is, you know, a wee bit dodgy to say the least. Being careful with what we say. But, you know, if the BBC can find that out within 6 months, and to be honest, the BBC probably already knew about it and they were probably sitting on it and stuff like that, because that's how these things.
The club knew about it because
But
to be fair to Johnson, Bain, and the
yeah, that's right. Alistair Johnson turned round and
they
said
warned
it
Murray
was
not
that.
to sell to him.
Yep. So after all those warnings, and even if that didn't happen, as I say, if the BBC are making this documentary in a few months of White's tenure about, I remember one woman, you know, who was a cleaner for him, and she hadn't been paid for 3 or 4 months' work. It was something ridiculous like that. Everybody knew that the guy basically took on companies that were struggling for money, said that he was going to redo them and revamp them and stuff like that, and he basically just stripped their assets and walked away with money for himself and left everyone behind. If you're telling me that Chris McLaughlin at the BBC knew about that, then you're not trying to tell me that Sir David Murray didn't know that as well.
Yeah, and it's that thing as well of saving. I think he probably has told himself that he was duped so often that he believes it.
Yeah,
because I think it's that word ego. I think there's two overall, and this is the David Murray chapter of Rangers is too long to talk about, but there is two things. It's ego. It starts as ego because he wants to be at somewhere that he can be the king, and Rangers needed a guy like that, and they did, and he gets to do it for so long, and by the mid-2000s, his world had changed, and he goes from being the king to just a bored guy, and he can't do what he used to do. And there's nothing worse, and we will have been through that ourselves. Like there's when you used to be able to do all the things you could do, and then by a certain point, you just get to that stage where you're not allowed to. Do you know what I mean? It must be hard. It must be difficult. And do you have any sympathy for David Murray?
that's a good question. I kind of find it hard to find sympathy for a guy who has achieved and, you know, gotten so much from life, you know, because I think the sympathy that he would be looking for is in terms of, well, you know, I was duped, etc., etc. But that's kind of like your job to know if you're duped or not. Do you know what I mean? Like, why would they, like, what is he wanting people to feel sorry for him because he didn't know what his job was like or something like that? I mean, that's like if you're a cleaner, say for example, and you forget to take the bins out, or you know, I'm really sorry, I was duped, I didn't know I had to take the bins out. It's like, well, it's your job to do that. Do you know what I mean? Like, I mean, so I don't think sympathy's a word. I think interesting and conflicting emotions behind it because, you know, again, the success on the pitch is there for everyone to see, but there is that overriding ending that, you know, does impact his legacy. His legacy is tarnished, I'll say that. You know, it's not anywhere near what he wanted it to be, and I think his legacy, you know, at Rangers is unfortunately tarnished by what was about to come.
It's been interesting.
It has been interesting going down all that again. thought we got away from it.
It's weird because I think there's a lot of stuff still not to be touched on, but I think you obviously there's so much to focus on later on, and it's been a weird show. It has.
Yeah, I mean it has been. I mean I've really enjoyed coming on and stuff. I think it's been a really good sort of open conversation. As you said at the start, just sort of letting it flow, and I think that's possibly the best way, Scott, because I think you find a lot of things in yourself that you maybe didn't know, and you
Yeah.
maybe bounce off each other. And you go, oh yeah, I forgot about the Las Vegas Suns thing. You know, I forgot about Philip Sebo, etc., etc. But no, it's been absolutely fantastic. It's been an absolute pleasure, mate.
It has been a pleasure to talk to you as well, and the subject has been a strange one. We do have one episode left. We are going to take a look at the aftermath of the David Murray era, and we'll do a wee Q&A as well. If you want to send your questions in for that show, please send it below in the comments, or you can send us it through social media, SM Media's social media. You'll find it there. If you've got a question about this whole period, then please send it below, and it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you very much to everyone that's tuned in. Thank you to Craig. It's been an absolute pleasure.
No problem at all, mate. Pleasure's all mine.
Thank you, and thank you very much. We will see you all soon. Cheers.